Hey everyone, it's Emily, the Career Catalyst, and this week we have been talking about interviewing, especially if you've been out of work for a while. So to add to that, what I really want to add today is some really good handy tips for video interviews, for how to do super well when you have a virtual interview. This can be really frustrating and very intimidating. And so I'm just going to give you a couple of really good hints to make you come off sounding polished and professional and like you've totally got this, because you totally do. So the first thing that I always mention to people about this virtual format is that it's very, very hard for people to pay attention when they're in these Zoom rooms, if you will. And that's just because our attention wanders. We're not actually in person with people. And that just kind of adds to our struggle to pay attention to whoever is speaking. I find myself doing this not when I'm in individual sessions with people or when I'm leading a discussion, but sometimes if I'm in, other kinds of meetings, if I'm listening to a presentation, I get a little flaky and I do things like check my email or look up a recipe or those kinds of things. And I have to pay a lot of attention to remind myself not to do it. So what does that mean for you? Mainly, it means when you're answering an interview question in a virtual setting, what you want to do is really focus on brevity. That means you want to be a little bit shorter in your answer than you might be otherwise. And I don't mean short like you're leaving information out, but a little bit of a focus on kind of keeping right on your topic, really kind of selling your point in a slightly shorter time frame. Now, another tip, and you'll see I'm doing a lot of it, is to make sure that your hands show every once in a while when you're being interviewed. And that's just a really old human thing, right? We're very wired to imagine that it's kind of a long time ago and everyone who approaches us is potentially a threat. And so when I can't see your hands if I'm having a conversation with you, my brain is going to default to thinking that you may actually mean me some harm. And so when you are on camera, the same thing holds true. There's a part of your brain that doesn't understand that even if I were holding a knife right now, I couldn't actually possibly be a threat to you. So just show your hands. It really makes you seem trustworthy, makes them kind of have a good feeling about you, all of that kind of stuff. Now, I also really recommend that when you're interviewing, you note the people's names. And what's so great about most online interviewing software is you're going to see their names right there on the camera. You don't have to worry about spelling, and you can make notes when they introduce themselves about pronunciation. This means that you are going to have that info to look back on very easily, and that's going to help you really be thoughtful in any follow-up you do with people. You're also going to want to speak extra clearly. Make sure there aren't sounds going on around you. If you have, a heater or a fan, turn that off for the interview. And that's just because how well they hear you is going to depend a lot on the quality of their microphones as well as yours. So, I really recommend something like a headset. This is a super cheap one. You can have a really nice one that's going to minimize any echoing that you hear. And as much as possible, when you're having an interview, try to make sure that nobody else in your immediate household is also online, so it doesn't kind of take away from your particular bandwidth as you're being interviewed. The other thing I really recommend, I've said this before, is to pay extra attention to eye contact. But in a virtual format, eye contact means something a little bit different. Your temptation in the interview is going to be to look at the actual eyes of the people interviewing you. The problem is those eyes are somewhere down here. And so you can see when I'm making eye contact with myself in this case, it doesn't look like I'm making eye contact because I'm looking at my own eyeballs. If I do this, which is looking up at the camera, it's much more like actual eye contact. So I say this a lot, it's a little bit cheesy, but I get either a little pair of googly eyeballs and stick them on either side of the camera lens, or just get a sticky note and draw eyes there. They don't have to be realistic. They just have to remind you that this is eye contact. And again, if you get nervous, you can also draw a little smiley face there. Smiling is going to calm you down, make you feel a little bit better. I said that in the blog. I stick with it. It's a really good tip. Now, as you're being interviewed, one of the things that you'll notice is in your nervous state, You may actually miss part of the question that they've asked you, or you might just have a moment where your sound cuts out, maybe they freeze a little bit, whatever it is. So why doesn't matter, but should you need to, you should absolutely always feel free to ask them to repeat the question. Honestly, you might get halfway into your answer and think, wait, what am I answering here? In which case you could absolutely always pause. Excuse me, I lost the thread there just a little bit. Could you repeat the question? Have them do that. If you need to ask them to clarify, you can always ask that as well. What do you mean by whatever phrase they used, right? And so that way you're really sure that you're answering the questions that they've asked you. It's very frustrating to be on the other side of the interview and ask a question only to have the person not entirely answer it. Now, related to that, again, I mentioned this in my blog post, but really key to the interview process and to making yourself really stand out and be an excellent interviewee is making sure that you answer the questions they ask you that are behavioral in nature with a story. A story is not, I don't like conflict. I try to avoid it whenever I can, but sometimes it's inevitable. And when that happens, I just think you have to listen to everyone's opinion about it and really do some troubleshooting so that everyone can learn to get along better. Right? That is not a story. A story is, well, I had this coworker once who had a really strong set of religious beliefs and really felt that because it meant so much to her, everyone else should share those. And so she had this really terrible habit of walking around to everyone and asking them to join her in her religion, go to church with her or maybe say grace before a meal with her, that kind of thing. And it was really off-putting. People really disliked it. And I got elected somehow to go be the one to speak with her. So I sat down and I started by saying, look, I understand that your beliefs are really important to you, but other people find it very off-putting. So we're all really hoping that you could back off a little bit, right? And that's not even a story. I don't even know, right? I made that up. So have a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I can really encourage you to think about the STAR format, which is situation, time, action, result. Particular time, something happened, roughly when it was. And it doesn't have to be like, in 2006, this happened, but you could say, when I was in this capacity or something like that. And then what you actually did, your actions, not a group's actions, not what your team did, what you as an individual did, and then what happened. And this is a really good way to answer any questions that are tell me about a time when. They're going to remember it better, and you're going to stand out from the crowd. Finally, if you get really nervous in the interview, which is a pretty normal thing to do, what you might find is that you kind of lose the thread a little bit of what you're trying to say. And, going back to that whole question of, asking them to repeat it, that's totally fine. But if you cannot think of an answer to save your life, you're going to say something like, wow, you know what? I know I have an example of a time that happened. For the life of me, I can't think of it right now. Can we move on to the next question? And I'll keep thinking on that. I'm sure I have an answer. I just need to shake it loose from my brain pan, something like that, right? You don't need to answer right away. You don't need to have all the answers in front of you, but in order to facilitate an easier process of answering the questions, I recommend you have some notes in front of you so that you remember some things you want to say. You can put them on your computer monitor, or you can just have a little notepad here kind of ready to go that you can, check in with periodically. If you are reading something from your notes, you're going to want to say, excuse me, I just have a note written down about that. Let me make sure I capture it correctly. And then you're going to look back up at them, right? So this is a really good way to make sure that you kind of guard against any anxiety-produced brain farts. You're just going to have your notes right there. You're going to be able to refer to them. It's often a really good practice also just to have a copy of your resume. You can have it up on your monitor, or you can have a printed copy of it. Something you can look at. Just reminds you of all of the cool stuff that you have done in your life. So I hope this is helpful. Don't be too worried about the video interview. It's just kind of the way of the world now. And if you have any questions about it, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and I will see you here next week. Take care and have a fabulous weekend.